So I will look at the case for Zambia as the civil society stands in all this. Okay. So as many of us are aware, Zambia is mainly a mining country. Its development trajectory is mainly shaped by mining. It's the second largest copper producer in Africa and 7th in the world. And almost 73% of all export revenues come from copper and cobalt commodity exports, and contributes to 31.4% of total government revenues, as well as 10.7% of total GDP. Zambia has 116 districts, and I can affirm that almost every district has some mining activity going on. And from all this, the total revenues collected from mining are quite significant. I have examples of 2008, 2015, as well as 2018. So for 2008, the total revenues accrued were 1.5 billion. Then for 2015, the total revenues accrued were 9.07 billion. And for 2018, the total revenues accrued were 17.9 billion, kwacha, that is. So I have some graphs here that are mainly depicting the Zambian income tax between 2009 and 2020. Okay, so we can see, I won't go value by value, but I'm sure we can all see the trend of how much money comes in, or how much income tax comes in Zambia, or how much income tax has been coming in during the period that I have mentioned. Okay, so I will move on to our production levels as well. Like I had mentioned, it's the second largest producer in Africa and the 7th in the world. So this is mainly depicting the numbers. As we can all see, I won't go through all of them one by one, but I'm sure we can all see. Okay, this is between 2014 and 2018. Then I'll move on to look at our debt problem. As many of us might have heard, Zambia defaulted or became the first African country to default a debt payment obligation of $42.5 million last year in November. And as we can see, as my screen is showing, over the years, this is mainly showing the history of our debt in a way. Okay, so we're looking at the debt that we have gotten from the multilateral partners, bilateral, via export and supplies credit, and also the Eurobonds. So as it stands right now, or as it stood in 2018, our debt stood at 10.23. But as it stands right now, we're currently at 12 billion US dollars, which is mainly accounting for 48% of our GDP. And then this is mainly a depiction of our domestic debt stock, our treasury bills, as well as our bonds. Then I'll move on to our external debt stock. This is mainly a list of all our creditors and how much, and the percentage changes between 2018 and 2019, or from 2017 to 2019, sorry. Okay, so we have all of our creditors listed here. The source is Ministry of Finance. Then also the principal and interest payments on the 3 Eurobonds. And now we move on to what the answer, or what we think the answer to our debt problem can be. So in this case, we believe mining can be the answer, but we need to firstly get our house in order. And I'll explain as to why. So when you look at Zambia at a glance, like I had mentioned, we get staggering amounts of revenue from the mining sector, okay? But a War on Wants report calculates that a staggering sum up to 3 billion a year is lost by the people of Zambia to tax, avoidance, and tax evasion by multinationals. So an analysis of the Zambian mining tax regime over the years shows that without generous tax exemptions and other linkages, tax authorities would have collected an additional 1.6 billion yearly from the sector, representing about 3.7% of GDP. And we firmly believe this 1.6 billion yearly can really help us. Because if we can get 1.6 billion yearly from the sector, I don't think we can be having problems of failing to pay debt obligations of $42.5 million. We cannot be having such problems. And then Zambia, as an example, loses almost 2 billion annually from corporate tax avoidance, equivalent to 10% of its GDP. Then there are also other activities, illegal small-scale mining activities that also affect us. For example, the FIC report continued to note the trend of foreigners purchasing stolen and illegally mined copper ores from small-scale miners. In most instances, the foreigners buy the slimes and copper ore for cash. And it was also noted that there were also some cases of illegal takeovers of mining licenses from the locals. And the amount that was detected, or that was estimated to be in excess, was about 5 billion kwacha, which is equivalent to $371 million. And then there's also another case of Glencore Group, which has a history of questionable tax practices since its founding days and operations in Zambia. Okay. Not until March this year, the government took over, but Glencore has operated a large copper mining production. Oh, sorry, it has operated and it has its subsidiary, which is Mopani Copper Mines, or it had until March when the government took over. So Glencore's Mopani project has been one of the top producers of Zambia, as we've all heard of the Big Four, in the last 2 decades. Despite earning nearly 6 billion in total revenues, Mopani recorded a total of only 28 million of income tax expenses over the recent 8-year period. And then this can also be related to, or we can also relate this to the issue of underpricing copper exports. As we look at okay. So here, this is the case of what is and what would be. So when we look at what would be, when we look at the revenue that would be, if there weren't issues of underpricing copper exports, we would be able to cover a lot of our debt obligations with this amount of money. Because when we look at this, this $300 US, we cannot fail to pay the $42.5 million payment as a nation. We cannot be having, we cannot be paying over 48% of our GDP towards debt servicing. Some of this money can actually go towards other social services, sectors like health, education. And when you look at what's happening right now with the COVID pandemic, how it has crippled many economies, Zambia not being an exception, this amount of money would have at least cushioned some of those impacts. But as it stands, this underpricing has really affected our economy. It has crippled our economy to very bad scenarios. And then we also look at the case of Konkola copper mine, where they were classifying imported goods as machinery so they do not attract custom duties. So when we look at all this, the import duty on items rather than mining machinery ranges from 50 to 25%, according to ZRA. And this company has been engaged in this conduct for the last 5 years, which is also uncalled for. So then we also look at timber. It's not just the minerals, extractives covers everything. So we also look at timber, where Mkula traders were declaring their sales as proceeds. This is also a loss of revenue for the country, and it's also uncalled for. So when you look at, or when we look at extractives and debt, we believe, or we all know that Zambia is currently looking for money. It's currently, or the outgoing government, or the previous government was in talks with the IMF to get a bailout loan. So I'm sure the new government will continue with that. So Zambia is in need of money. We have a lot of unsustainable debt that has accumulated over the years. And we believe that the extractives industry is the answer. Because if anything, we might not even have borrowed this money if all these leakages were closed up, all these gaps, if all these gaps were dealt with at an early stage. Because when you look at all these mineral booms do increase the appetite for countries to borrow. And governments anticipate booms in terms of commodity prices because they believe whatever mineral booms are there will actually bring in more revenue for the country. So they believe once they borrow a bit for infrastructure development or whatever, they'll be able to pay back. So there's always hope when it comes to mineral booms, but it's just unfortunate that they are usually, the prices fluctuate on the international market, so we can't really bet on that. And then, yeah, when we look at the mineral discoveries around the countries, it's in line with my previous point. It does attract loans. Well, this can be attributed to the case of Ghana as well as Mozambique's debt increasing because of the discovery of oil and gas. Okay, so now we can bring it down to our social sectors. Because when you look at, I'll just use the 2020 national budget. When we look at our 2020 national budget, and we look at the amounts that are going towards external debt and domestic debt, they are tremendous amounts. But when you look at the amounts that are going towards the health sector and other social services and education, the amounts are quite little. And seeing that our population is over 18 million, this is not enough. So when we look at the results of the debt being increased, the social injustices that are happening, the youth, unfortunately, we the youth are going to pay for the mistakes that have happened in the past. We're actually hoping with the new government that we have now, some of these issues can be addressed. Because the external debt has been diminishing our resources meant for poverty reduction, which has exerted a significant crowding out effect on social expenditures. So the figures there are actually, as we can all see, the figures there are explaining everything. They're self-explanatory, which is something that is very helpful. Because even in 2021, in the 2021 national budget, it was the same issue, it was the same case scenario. So this is something that we hope in the 2022 budget won't be the case. We know we are short on funding as a country, but we hope with changes of policies and whatnot, well, we'll get better as a country, we'll get to a better fiscal standing as a country. So I would also want to add on the other impacts of debt and the extractive tax leakages. So when you look at government paying off debt, like I had mentioned, 48% of it goes towards debt servicing, and there's only little left for social services and the like. This aspect of government paying off debt also, it leads to the depreciation of the kwacha. So there's mopping up of the dollar in the country, meaning we have scarcity of the dollar, which which leads to it appreciating against the kwacha. And this affects our exchange rate as a local currency. Like I said, it depreciates the kwacha. And in this instance, when we look at our economy, the cost of living has really gone high. has gone really high, and people are failing to actually access even basic needs, which isn't good for a country. Like for a mining country, if you claim to be the second, if your country is the second copper producer, highest copper producer in Africa and the seventh in the world, you don't expect to be going through such issues. You don't expect your country to be mopping up the dollar. You don't expect the exchange rate or your local currency to be depreciating at such levels. You don't expect scarcity of service delivery and whatnot. You don't expect a pandemic like COVID to literally erode your economy to a point where poverty levels shoot up, inequality levels go high. That shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be a case where your hospitals, your medical facilities are failing to have essential drugs. It shouldn't be a case where all the drugs are expensive. Like, people shouldn't be facing such challenges. But unfortunately, that's the case in Zambia. There are a lot of implications that have become really fatal for a common Zambian. And when we look at the communities that are actually housing these mining companies, there isn't much development going on there. So you'd even wonder, is this a country that is heavily endowed with mineral resources? It does not make sense. It's like what's on paper and what's on the ground are two different things. Hence, bridging the gap between what can be and what is right now. So in line with what I have mentioned, we are proposing some effective, lasting solutions or recommendations. So for a start, there's an aspect of fiscal discipline. In as much as we get the revenues that we do from the mining companies, there are issues of public theft. Corruption is a big case in Africa, and mismanagement of funds. Most people don't know, most of the Zambians don't know where this money goes, because we do not really see what we expect to see, being that we're a mining country and there are revenues that come from the sector. And there isn't much transparency and accountability in the management of it all. Even with the acquisition of debt, as it stands right now, in as much as I had mentioned the $12 billion that we're owing currently, most of us do not know when and how that was done. There isn't much transparency and accountability of it all. And then there's also an aspect of it not being the case, there should be more money that we owe. And most people are not aware of that. So that's also another loophole. So we hope there will be we hope for these constitutional provisions that are very clear to involve the parliament and the implementation of it all, because it needs, this whole fiscal indiscipline needs to come to an end. And then there's also an aspect of us following the debt and mining revenue money. Like I had mentioned, there isn't much transparency and accountability of it, or we need to know who is benefiting from this. Of course, we have seen some roads, we have seen some bridges, we have seen this and that, but we still need to know how much do we owe, who do we owe? Like where is all this mining revenue going? Is that the actual amount that is being paid, or is there more? Okay, and then there's also an aspect of us getting our legislations right. We need to define our IFFs, and we need to have heavy penalties for tax fraud and tax evasion, because we believe this will guarantee benefits of mining host communities. There is no way people should be getting away, or companies or whatever cooperating partners should be getting away with tax fraud and tax evasion at the expense of us Zambians. We believe that is not right, and our people need to benefit from their God-given resources. And as CSOs, we also need to develop a technical team that will provide and recommend alternative policy and positive changes. Then as Zambia, we are heavily dependent on mining, let me just say copper. But I want to end this presentation with a quote from the recent inauguration that took place, because I believe this is a cornerstone, or this should be set as a cornerstone as we move forward, especially in our mining sector, as we try to grow the sector, as we try to grow the tax base, so that we can get more revenue from the sector, which will go towards developing our country, making the lives of our country, men and women, better, as well as servicing these debts. Okay. So like our president mentioned in his speech, I will quote him. He said, in mining, we will strive to increase copper and other mineral production so that Zambia can reclaim its place as one of Africa's leading mining countries. We shall promote expansion of the mining value chain as well as the promotion of mineral diversification. We will therefore encourage the production and processing of gemstones, gold, nickel, manganese, iron, industrial and other minerals. We will put in place measures to facilitate local ownership and increase participation of Zambians in the sector. Okay. So, increased participation of Zambians in the sector will definitely burden the tax base, and all this will actually bring in or build more investor confidence, because I believe we lost that due to our unstable, let's just say, our constantly changing of the tax regime. So with this, I believe once our economy, our mining sector has better policies running it, this will actually help in covering or cushioning some of this pressure from the debt that we have accrued as a country.
To read and sign the Harare Declaration, go to www.afrodat.org/initiatives. Click on Afrodat Conference on Debt and Development, and then read more. And finally, the outcome statement.